All hell had broken loose. Sophie could barely believe she had survived for this long. Getting used to one dramatic change in her life was hard enough, but almost immediately after, the entire world had seemed to go crazy. As a result, she now had a whole new existence to try and adapt to, scavenging for what little scraps of food she could find in the ruined, desolate city. The monsters could appear at any time, day or night, either one on their own or whole droves of the nightmarish creatures that had been let loose on the world. This life was somehow far more dangerous on a day-to-day basis than her old one had been. And given Sophie used to work for the SCP Foundation, that really was saying something. Formerly known as Dr. Cartwright, she had been a researcher at the Foundation for a number of years. While she had been far from reaching the upper echelons of the organization's most notorious staff, with the likes of Drs. Jack Bright and Kane Pathos Crow, nobody could deny Sophie was an expert when it came to studying the anomalous. As much as she understood the importance of their directive to safeguard humanity, the Foundation had, first and foremost, been a job to her, a means to an end, something to earn a living from and then move on. It wasn't worth giving up everything for, and when her life needed more focus than her work, Sophie wasn't hesitant to step away. Her mother had fallen ill, terminally, and as a result needed around-the-clock care. So Dr. Sophie Cartwright had no choice but to hand in her resignation from the SCP Foundation. There were times when she missed it, and moments after her mother eventually passed that Sophie considered going back. But she came to realize it wasn't the work itself she missed, not even her co-workers at the Foundation. It was the occasional rare anomaly that was just a completely harmless little oddity, not a monstrous abomination. Often in her new, unfamiliar life of resignation, Sophie would find herself looking wistfully at a picture of herself and one such anomaly. Technically, it was against the Foundation's rules to possess any photographic evidence of SCPs, but Sophie had made sure it didn't look like anything out of the ordinary. The picture had been taken on her phone and showed Sophie crouching down with the face of a curious but completely normal-looking black and gray tabby cat poking up in the foreground. Nothing about the picture gave any indication that the cat, named Josie, was actually missing her hindquarters and back legs. SCP-529, as the Foundation had designated her, was one of the few completely harmless SCPs in their care. Her only anomalous trait being that her entire back half was missing, either because it didn't exist or had somehow been displaced in another dimension, hence her nickname, Josie the Half-Cat. Given that she had been allowed to roam freely around the Foundation facility she was kept in, Josie had run across Dr. Cartwright a number of times, the pair of them eventually becoming friends. With a sigh and smile, Sophie had been looking at the photo on the day everything went wrong. Steel-capped boots came rushing up the stairs and down the corridors to her apartment, worn by a group of black-clad mercenaries. You see, unbeknownst to Sophie at the time she had tendered her resignation from the SCP Foundation, a number of the organization's higher-ups had also done the same. While Sophie's reasons for leaving were purely personal, the wave of resignations from other high-ranking Foundation personnel came as a reaction to something called Project Pneuma. This was an operation that had uncovered a disturbing truth about the psychosphere, a shared human unconsciousness that had led to the O5 Council proposing a new directive for the organization. Those that objected left the Foundation. Others were killed by their former employer and its merciless hit squads in cold blood. Perhaps thanks to some administrative error filing Sophie's resignation alongside those that had left after learning about Pneuma, or maybe because the Foundation didn't want her extensive knowledge of the anomalous being used against their newfound directive, they had sent a mobile task force to her apartment. Filing down the corridor, the soldiers lifted a battering ram and swung it forward, shattering the door, wooden splinters littering the floor as they breached the entrance. But Sophie had heard them coming, escaping as fast as she could, descending a fire escape ladder until she reached the street below. At that moment in time, Sophie had no idea why the Foundation had sent a hit squad out to kill her. Of course, the answer to that question quickly became obvious. Shortly after, reports came pouring in from all over the world, broadcast over every news channel before they were ultimately blocked. The SCP Foundation had gone public, revealing its existence to the entire world and declaring its new mission statement. Rather than protecting the world from anomalies, the Foundation had declared war. calling for the total and utter extinction of humanity. While Sophie had no way of knowing the reasons for the Foundation going rogue, it was clear that working for them in the past had put a target on her back. Luckily, she managed to avoid the MTF coming after her, getting swept up in a crowd that was fleeing from something far more horrific. SCP-682 had been released and was devouring people in broad daylight. The waking nightmare didn't stop there. Over the next few months, the Foundation released a number of dangerous anomalies on the world, using them to slaughter innocent people in droves, assassinate world leaders, and cripple organizations like the Global Occult Coalition to hinder humanity's chances of fighting back. And amongst it all, living through the chaos and carnage were tiny pockets of survivors. Although those two were starting to be rapidly picked off by the Foundation, deploying more of their mobile task force operatives or compliant SCPs to eliminate the refugees. Sophie had witnessed firsthand the Foundation's attacks, and as a result, had found it best to keep moving from camp to camp, only staying with one group of fellow survivors for a few nights each before moving on. She wasn't sure if the Foundation was specifically attacking the refugee camp she stopped at, or if it was a continuous, systematic extermination effort. She'd been noting down her ponderings in a half-burned notebook she had found while scavenging abandoned grocery stores for any remaining food that was still edible. A cynical part of her thought that it was perhaps pointless to document what was happening, but the former researcher and Sophie wanted to preserve any information she could about what the Foundation was subjecting people to. If anything, that knowledge might prove useful to someone in the future. Although, what future was a question Sophie Cartwright kept returning to, with no optimistic answer in sight. It was easy to miss how things had once been, to yearn for life, to get back to the way it once was, even though it was impossible now that the anomalies were rampaging the world over. It made sleeping hard, the fear of waking up to see the face of SCP-682 or SCP-096 staring back at her the moment she opened her eyes. One night, it was worse than ever. Every sound, no matter how faint or far away in Sophie's mind, could have been made by a carnivorous creature or an approaching Foundation foot soldier. A bottle clinked, waking Sophie from her restless sleep. Something was nearby, and from the sound of it, it was getting closer and closer. Sitting up in the alleyway she'd been sleeping in, Sophie looked around her, feeling her heart thumping against her ribs in fear. Then, through the dark, she caught the sight of a pair of beady, reflective eyes, followed by the sounds of a drawn-out, defensive yowl. For a second, she wondered if it could be. No, surely not. The eyes approached, a small, shadowy form behind them. Sophie could barely make it out in the night's darkness, even with the glow of distant fires in the sky on the horizon. But from what she could see, the creature approaching her was small, just about smaller than an average cat, about half the size. Her fingers trembling, she reached out a hand towards it as gently as she could, allowing it to sniff her for a moment. Then she felt it duck under her open palm, letting her stroke up its arched back. When her hand reached about halfway, Sophie could feel the slight yield of a barely tangible back half, which could only mean one thing. "Josie?" Sophie asked, holding a sob at the back of her throat. The little half-cat replied with a meow, recognizing the voice of her human friend from the Foundation. Immediately she leaped into the former researcher's lap, allowing Dr. Cartwright to hold her and stroke her. Giving in, so glad to be reunited with Josie, Sophie started to let out stifled sobbing sounds, careful not to attract attention, but allowing herself to be the happiest she'd felt in months since this had all started. Although she had no way of understanding Josie's meows, Dr. Cartwright assumed that the brave little half-cat had managed to escape the Foundation facility she used to call home with relative ease. And she was right. Since Josie was allowed to roam freely, she had been able to make a break for it when the Foundation's MTF kill squads opened fire on their own personnel at their various sites across the globe. The loud noise had caused Josie the Half-Cat to flee and hide until the sounds of gunfire and screams had all died down. By the time she emerged from her hiding place, a number of the anomalies once kept in containment had now been set loose on the world. With the facility busted wide open, SCP-529 had taken it upon herself to leave, and had been surviving in much the same way Sophie had, scavenging for scraps, passing from one refugee camp to the next, usually greeted with curiosity by any ordinary civilian who had never seen a cat with its entire back half missing. Now that they had been tearfully reunited, Josie and Sophie stuck together on their continuing travels through the now treacherous and SCP-infested world. Sophie's entries in her makeshift journal started to take on much more positive tones. While it was hard to be entirely optimistic living through an anomalous apocalypse, her spirits were at least lifted by having her little half-cat companion alongside her. Josie never seemed to stray too far from Sophie's side as they hiked their way across the country. Occasionally, SCP-529 would climb up her human friend's back and rest on her shoulders as they traversed more open terrain, her missing back half making it look like the little half-cat was perched precariously on her front two legs, next to Sophie's head. And, of course, whenever they stopped for the night, Josie would sleep curled up and purring contentedly, right next to Sophie. When the next morning came, she would awaken, stretch out her front paws with a yawn, then nuzzle at Sophie's sleeping face to wake her up. At first, Dr. Cartwright's plan had been to head due west from where she had started, hoping to reach Yellowstone National Park and access SCP-5000. There was a Foundation facility there, hidden deep underground and filled with all manner of anomalous technology. It was all intended to be used in case the world ended, and the human race was wiped out, even capable of mass-producing new human beings with customized memories, as well as holding a backup of all cumulative knowledge and data on Earth. Every book ever written, every terabyte of information on the internet, everything. However, passing through another camp, Sophie and Josie received word from one of the other survivors. Apparently, the Foundation had predicted that somebody with knowledge of SCP-5000 might try something like that, and how it would undermine their plans to wipe out humanity. During one of the moments where rebelling groups were able to temporarily restore TV and internet service, it was reported that the Foundation had already put a stop to that potential option from reverting their apocalypse. They had intentionally triggered an eruption of the Yellowstone supervolcano, totally obliterating the facility housing SCP-5000 and one of humanity's last hopes at survival. Well, thanks for telling me, Sophie sighed. By now, she had long given up almost all hope that things would ever be the same again. But hearing the news about Yellowstone had extinguished the last little ember of optimism that she had left. There was no way back. Sensing her friend was upset, Josie meowed at her, either as if to tell Sophie, "It's okay," or, "I'm hungry." As the pair turned to leave, though, the other survivor called out at them. "Wait!" they said. "Look, I heard another rumor, and it might be a total myth, but there's meant to be a sanctuary not far from here." "What do you mean, sanctuary?" Sophie asked. "Like another camp? The Foundation will wipe it out within a week." "No, not a camp," the survivor replied. "It's just a rumor, but supposedly there's a refuge. Some place where the SCP Foundation can't get to. Apparently there's a shelter, as well as plenty of food and water, probably enough for you and the little one." Sophie looked out of the corner of her eye at Josie, balanced on her shoulder. The pair of them had gone weeks without eating before arriving at this camp, and she had no idea how long it would be before they reached the next. The sight of her half-cat companion motivated her. They needed to survive. As long as they did, the Foundation couldn't win. Giving the other survivor a nod, they pointed her in the right direction. "That way, a few miles at least, but you gotta be careful getting through the forest," they explained. "Be careful. The Foundation's got people out on patrols over there, and they're real weird too. I seen them doing this strange ritual, letting their commander stab them, testing whether they can still feel pain or not." Within a few hours, the sun had set, with both Sophie and Josie deep in the heart of the woods. Just like every night since the Foundation had initiated their war on humanity, every sound, every snapped twig or rustling leaves in the breeze, filled Sophie with dread. But this time, at least she knew with certainty that there were MTF troops nearby. She could see their flashlights, beams of light bleeding through between the trees. Carefully holding Josie in her arms, she stepped carefully and quietly as she could through the forest. The half-cat was trembling, clearly feeling just as fearful as Sophie was. The former researcher was praying that her little friend wouldn't make a sound. She knew she wouldn't be able to help it if she did. Cats did instinctively make defensive yowls if they felt threatened, but even the slightest noise from Josie would give away their position to the MTF sweeping the area. "Fan out!" she heard the task force's field commander call. "Even spread. If there's anyone here, you all know what to do." Sophie ducked down behind a fallen tree, covering her own mouth with her free hand, trying to stop her panicked breathing. Her only option were to make a break for it, dashing through the forest in hope she and Josie weren't caught, or worse, killed. Though these days there was really no difference between the two. Or she could wait for the MTF to pass by, continuing their search. She had spent months trying to survive in this anomalous apocalyptic nightmare. By now the Foundation couldn't have known she was there. Their forces were just combing the forest looking for any survivors they could find. But if she stayed still, there was still a chance one of the MTF would find her and Josie, and would either alert the others or just open fire on the spot. All things considered, neither option sounded ideal. Josie was getting restless, trying to wriggle free of Sophie's grip. The half-cat's incorporeal back half meant Sophie could only hold what little underside the feline friend had. Slowly she started to get up and made her way out from behind the tree, right into the path of an MTF trooper's flashlight. "Got a live one!" he yelled. A flash of light and a loud bang echoed through the forest. The bullet had torn through Sophie's chest, nearly missing her half-cat, but the noise of the shot had been more than enough to startle her. As Sophie dropped to the forest floor, gripping her heavily bleeding wound and writhing in pain, Josie leaped into the air towards the Foundation operative. Either in shock or because she somehow understood her protector had been shot, the brave little cat started clawing at the soldier's face. Despite her sharp front claws tearing at him, leaving red lines over his face, the armed man didn't react. It was as if he couldn't feel pain at all. The MTF trooper gripped Josie by the neck fur, pulling her away from him. Before he could reach for his sidearm, someone charged at him, knocking the Foundation operator over. Another shot rang out as he fell, tackled by Sophie. Meanwhile, Josie had dropped to the ground, landing on her two visible feet and hissing at the soldier. Scrambling to her feet, Sophie picked up Josie and ran, the sounds of the rest of the task force receding into the distance behind her. The little half-cat was looking back over her human friend's shoulder, watching as the sweeping flashlights of the MTF kill squad fanned between the trees until they eventually disappeared from view. Her earlier adrenaline spike began to drop sharply in time with the gradual rise of the sun. Sophie had long since slowed down, certain that she'd be able to give the Foundation's foot soldiers the slip. Josie had taken her favorite perch on Sophie's shoulder again, meaning she could use her hands to apply pressure to her two wounds. But with every step, the former researcher could feel her limbs getting heavier. Her pulse, which had drummed faster than ever as her and her half-cat had fled, was now slowing down with every fading beat. She was tired, so much that she could barely keep her head up, until eventually, Sophie had to stop. She sat at the edge of a lake in the middle of the forest, exhaustedly trying to catch her breath. Calmly, Josie hopped off her shoulder and sat down at her side, licking her paw and cleaning behind her ears. Sophie looked at her little friend and smiled, feeling a tear run down her face. She reached into her bag and produced her journal, tearing out a page and scrawling down a note with the last of her strength. "To whoever finds this half-cat, her name is Josie. She's my only friend left in the whole world. I've taken care of her for as long as I can, but I'll be dead soon. Please take care of her for me. Take her to safety. Be good to her, and she'll be good to you. And if you scavenge any cheese, only give her a little as a treat." After tying the note to Josie's midsection, so it rested atop her semi-corporeal back half, Sophie looked around one last time. The lake was calm, a tiny pocket of remaining peace in a world gone mad, overrun with anomalies. "Guess we did make it to a sanctuary after all, Josie," she whispered weakly. Giving her little half-cat one last scratch behind the ears, Josie meowed gratefully. Finally, unable to keep her eyes open and her head up any longer, Sophie Cartwright let herself drift off. Josie was left meowing at her friend to wake up. She sat with her all day. She didn't move, didn't even wake up when Josie nuzzled her face against hers like she had before. Sophie's face felt much colder now against the confused half-cat's fur. Eventually, Josie wandered off into the forest, towards an uncertain future. Maybe if this future wasn't set in stone, if it could be reset, then Josie the Half-Cat would see her friend Sophie again. Now go and check out SCP-5000, the full story compilation, if you want to know more about the events that led up to now. Or take a little trip back in time and spend a day with Josie the Half-Cat in Is SCP-999 No Longer the Cutest SCP? SCP-529 Josie the Half-Cat.